All right, we're going to go through a few definitions so that we all mean the same thing when we use certain words. And these definitions you can find in the Glossary class. It's a class that everyone should be enrolled in. There's a big PDF in the class resources of that class that has all of these definitions. We're only going to talk about 4 definitions here. That's carrying power, propulsive force, which we're going to call thrust, engagement, and then we're going to identify the definition of forward. Okay, carrying power. Carrying is one of the 2 forces of the hindquarters. It is the governing force. Carrying governs thrust. It is not thrust, it's separate. Carrying is the ability of the hindquarters joints by the arrangement of their mechanically advantageous angles to manage the mass of the horse plus the rider in every condition, in motion and out of motion, and to govern that mass and its thrust by deliberately propelling along a determined line of travel. The carrying power carries weight. Weight is what is carried, and the seat is weight. This carrying ability of the hindquarter joints determines and gauges the force of the thrust per stride. It adjusts the trajectory of that thrust. It adjusts the length of the footsteps, and it restrains and or recycles that thrust. When you're reading in the classical old men, when they say restraining aids, they're talking about carrying power, or they're talking about your seat's weight acting as a restraint. Okay. Propulsive force or thrust is the other force or dynamic of the hindquarters, and it is directed motion. So once we have a horse moving, then when we connect him, when he goes onto the contact, he will start to develop thrust. The other names for propulsive force or thrust are driving force, propulsive force, pushing force, impulsion. The thrust is governed by carrying. So carrying does dominate or have priority over thrust, but we protect and nurture thrust. It's like our precious little thing we keep, that the carrying keeps. Training aims to make the management of the thrust perfect. What is engagement? Engagement is something that we will be training deliberately. It pertains to the uppermost joints of the hindquarters, or the joints of the hindquarters. I never think, oh, I've got to get his stifle engaged. I engage the joints above it. Engagement is the mechanical flexion and putting into gear of the joints of the hindquarters, sacrum, hip, stifle, by weight bearing. In mechanical engineering, to engage is to make one part of a machine fit into and move together with another part of a machine, like a gear. A gear is a machine part that engages A gear is a machine part that engages with another part to transmit force, i.e. thrust. Instead of talking about machine levers and gears, when training horses, we're talking about the deliberate interplay of the large bones of the hindquarters, their angles to each other, and their yoints. I always call them yoints because that's what my teacher, Major Lindgren, called them, yoints. Okay, I'm going to send you to the French Cavalry Manual, page 64, so you can read more about engagement in these bone angles, and there's even a drawing there. Here it is. Changing the degree of the angles of the hindquarters changes the speed, force, direction, and trajectory. Sorry, my cat just bit me. Sorry. Jerry. Oh, God. He bit me on the ankle. I'm going to start this paragraph over. Hi, honey. Hi, Ricky. That is a boy. Changing the degree of the angles of the hindquarters changes the speed, force, direction, and trajectory of the power source, the hindquarters. Remember a couple minutes ago when we were talking about carrying and how it adjusts and determines the speed, force, direction, and trajectory? This is what it is. Engagement is when we change the degree of the angles of the hindquarters by weight. We change the degree of the angles of the bones of the haunches with weight. This is to say, weight is the means with which we adjust engagement. This is how we can say that we sit a horse onto the bit. So what I'm saying to you here is that my horse feels me add weight on one hip, the other hip, or both hips, and he accepts that weight into his uppermost joints, and this changes the angles of his hindquarters. So he will then go different. He will travel different, and that is what riding is, in a nutshell. I am praying this was a light bulb for some of you. Okay. We're going to continue on with the discussion of carry, go forwards. But really, without carrying, go is useless. Just remember that. Without carrying, going means zip, and it has zero value and flunks. Carrying governs going. Carrying governs thrust. Now, we hear people talk a lot about forwards. And, oh, he's very forward. Well, most horses that they say are forward are actually running in a hurry or are tense, because forwards is always going to include carrying. And in fact, the horse has to be conscious that he's carrying. It has to be his own desire to carry. And that really is what forward is. You're going to find this on Gymnasium, page 71. So forwards is a quality or idea in the mind of the well-trained horse. Now, he could be well-trained when he's 4. They can understand this idea very early on, and we want them to. Their idea of this will become more sophisticated and pure and perfect as they develop, but it is an idea that we have to install into their little minds early on. Okay, so your assignment is going to be to read Gymnasium 71 through 75, and there's a study guide attached to that, and if you don't have the book Gymnasium, because it's kind of expensive, the pages are in the class resource. They're scanned in there, so you'll have them. They do have my scribbles all over them, but it's better than nothing. Okay. Forwards is desire to carry, the desire to advance the load.